And our guest spends up to 4 months a year each year in Afghanistan. Today, she's going to talk with us about working to deal with issues of poverty, literacy, and other aspects of development away from the world's media, focused as they are on the military operations in other parts of that country. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the Honourable Flora MacDonald to deliver the 6th Saul Kanee Memorial Lecture.
Well, thank you very much indeed for that generous welcome. And I just want to say how pleased I am to be back again in Winnipeg. For 2 reasons. It's a great honor to be asked to give this 6th annual Saul Kanee lecture, a very prestigious lecture, and to commemorate the contributions that he as an individual made to his community, his province, and his country. Saul Kanee was a man of great distinction. His work for the Jewish community and for the city of Winnipeg lent even greater distinction to the accomplishments he achieved on their behalf. Justice and peace were his watchwords. I am indeed pleased to have this opportunity, as I say, to come back here, and I look forward to the exchanges that we will have later on this afternoon on a subject which has really had a prominent place in our media newscasts for the past few years. And so I'm going to talk to you about that place this afternoon. That is Canada's role in Afghanistan, but probably not the way in which it is usually depicted in our newscasts. But like Saul Kanee's major pursuits during his lifetime, the majority of Afghan citizens with whom I meet have as their greatest desire peace and justice. On earlier occasion, I have spoken to groups across the country, many groups, about Afghanistan, giving my comments the title, Afghanistan, Failed State or Struggling Democracy, when it was just emerging from the throes of a takeover by the USSR, the Soviet Union. Afghanistan then succumbed to 8 years of civil war and the imposition of the Taliban rule, which became progressively more severely fundamentalist. During that period of civil war, something in the vicinity of 2 million people were killed, most of them men. Later, after 9/11 and the arrival of American and NATO troops, then things seemed to be improving in Afghanistan, and I spoke then about another view of Afghanistan. That was a view that took one beyond the well-known centers of Kabul and Kandahar to rural Afghanistan, where one could see at that point a return to normal life. That is, if anything could be called normal in a country which is the 3rd poorest country in the world. Nevertheless, some progress was being made. Now, I want to mention to you that when I go to Afghanistan, I do a lot of photography. And what you see behind me is some of the photographs that come out of picture taking in Afghanistan. And I know that there are people in the audience this afternoon who come from Afghanistan, and I hope you will see things that you may recognize from your own country and be reminded of really how beautiful it is in its own way. That was what it was like when I first went to Afghanistan when the Taliban was still the government. That was back in 2001. And then, of course, there was the imposition of the Taliban government was very much the government. But later, when that was overthrown, as I say, the area then descended into civil war. But that has changed, and so today what you see is what the situation is like in rural Afghanistan. What is it like today? Well, another wave of fighting by a resurgent Taliban has brought its forces to the very gates of the capital, Kabul. In fact, now it is even coming into Kabul. It is not very safe to be walking around the streets of Kabul on your own, which I used to do, but I don't anymore. Speaking after the recent prison break in Kandahar, from which more than 90 prisoners escaped, Abdulrahim, who earlier had fought against the Taliban, said, as reported in the New York Times, "We don't have a system here. The government does not have a solution. Without the presence of international forces in southern Afghanistan to help, I think the Afghan National Army or police would fail to come out of their bases." A rising chorus of complaints equally scathing about the failings of the government can be heard all around the country. A Western diplomat in Kabul recently made this comment: "The collapsing confidence in the government of President Hamid Karzai is so serious that if the Taliban had wanted to, they could have seized control of the city of Kandahar on the night of the recent prison break." This is one of a number of recent articles in the major media outlets of the world along the same lines. That is, raising the prospect once again of Afghanistan becoming a failed state. First, let me mention that I have been going to Afghanistan regularly since March of 2001, when the Taliban still formed the government and had control over most of the country. Only the Northern Alliance, led by Ahmed Shah Massoud and his Mujahideen fighters, blocked the Taliban from a complete takeover of the country. On September the 9th, 2001, Massoud was shot by two visitors posing as TV photographic journalists. The shooting of Massoud, who was really leading the country at that point, it was the signal for other Mujahideen hiding in the United States to carry out the 9/11 demolition of the Twin Towers in New York. That was the signal for them to move. In May of this year, I made my 10th trip to Afghanistan. When I make these trips, I venture out to the high central mountain provinces of Bamiyan, Parwan, Uruzgan, and further south to the provinces of Ghazni and Paktia. In these areas, I travel with the local people, sleep in their mud brick huts, and eat their unvaried but healthy food. As a result of this long and intimate relationship with the people of Afghanistan, I would like to state certain assumptions gained from these experiences. This is what I have come to summarize after being there on 10 different occasions. 1, progress is being made in Afghanistan, although certainly not uniformly throughout the country. 2, a form of governance is emerging, although not particularly the one dictated by Western thinking. 3, rebuilding Afghanistan is going to take a long time, militarily to contain the Taliban in their heartlands of Kandahar and Helmand, Zabul, Paktika, and other provinces in the southeast and northeast. But not all so-called Taliban are militant. Among them are people who also desire peace and stability in their country, and many would willingly share these views with others. And, that is something that needs to be considered when people are saying, should they be talking, should there be discussions with the Taliban? Should we be trying to talk to them? Should the countries who are involved there, the international countries, really put out feelers to try and see whether or not they can make plans with these Taliban to restore peace and stability to the country? And I just want to tell you, on one occasion when I first went there, I was, at that time, I was doing work with Care Canada, or for Care Canada, and we were doing something which was quite unusual at that point. We were finding people who had homes with an extra room in them, and we would ask them if they could make that room available for young girls to go to quietly and sit there, and we would find one of the many women who were school teachers but who could not teach at that period. And so the teacher would come and they would hold regular classes for these girls who were not allowed to go to school at that point by Taliban decree, and women teachers who were not allowed to teach. So we had these going in a number of centers, and I was coming back from that one time when a couple of men, I could tell they were Taliban by their large black turbans, and they came up to me and said, "We know what you're doing," which, of course, when somebody says that to you, you say, "Now what's next?" And they said, "Yes, we know what you're doing, but we won't say anything about it if you'll allow our daughters to go to school too." You never quite know what you're going to find. The Taliban, like any other political movement, has its moderates and it has those who are anything but moderate. My next point, rebuilding Afghanistan politically, economically, and socially may take much longer than it will to do so militarily. But Afghans themselves will be able to meet these challenges if they can count on a measure of security. Point 5. In the broad sweep of history, Afghanistan has been around for a long, long time. It has suffered attacks, defeats, and partial occupations, but it has never been conquered. Even Alexander the Great had flattering comments to make about it when he traversed it some 2,300 years ago. When I first went to Afghanistan in March of 2001, there were very few cars on the streets of Kabul, few men, and even fewer women. Today, traffic jams are frequent. Some would call this progress in a materialistic sense. Buildings are now sprouting up in the 4 major centers of Kabul, Kandahar, Herat, and Mazar-Sharif. A paved ring road connecting these 4 centers is well on its way to completion, outlining the extremities of Afghanistan. Point 7. But what about rural Afghanistan, the places in between or inside that ring road, where 60% of the population of Afghanistan live in their traditional villages? Point 8. The first time I visited the Shaidan Valley in the western part of Bamiyan province, a group of teenagers who had been demobilized from the warlords' militias told us very bluntly that what they wanted was to go to school. They came up to us and said, when we were meeting with them, they said, "We know what we want. We want to go to school. All we know at the moment, since we were in the militias, the only thing we know how to do is shoot a gun. We've never had the chance to have any learning." And so we said to them, well, if you build yourselves a school, we'll find you a teacher. They went away. They came back a few days later and they said, we've got it all figured out. Good for them. They are very ingenious people. And they said, we are each going to make 2,000 mud bricks, and we're going to bring them back, and we're going to build a school. So they all arrived back eventually with their 2,000 mud bricks, and they set about and they built a school, a 2-room school, 1 room for the girls and 1 room for the boys. Now, I can tell you that that school is never going to win any architectural prize, but it served its purpose. And education, I may say, and I found this every time I've gone to Afghanistan, education is one of the most sought-after goals in Afghanistan. Point 9. The Afghan people are hardworking and ingenious. Most villages have no electricities, so it means that once the sun goes down, their mud brick huts are without light or heat. Abdullah Barat, that's my one employee, Abdullah Barat, originally from Afghanistan, but then living in Ottawa, is a man I persuaded to leave his well-paid job in Ottawa and to return to his native Bamiyan province and work with future generations. There he led the rebuilding of the devastated villages in the Shaidan Valley in Bamiyan province. And in cooperation with another NGO, Norwegian Church Aid, we undertook a program of buying, installing, and maintaining solar panels on the roofs of the little mud brick houses. Point 9. The energy collected in these solar panels is transferred to a battery inside the house, and from there it is connected to a neon rod light in the ceiling. The artificial light immediately transforms the lives of the villagers. Children are able to study in the evenings. Women can do weaving. Men can attend to many chores about the household. Many tasks are simplified by the use of battery power. But that's not all. Wind and water power are also being harnessed to provide additional power. The water is also filtered to provide clean drinking water. And one has to ask, how did all this happen? Well, primarily because the villagers undertook to come together under the leadership of Abdullah Berat to develop a work plan and discuss how they should proceed. They decided to elect their own village council, or shura, and these shuras meet on a weekly basis, discuss the needs of the village, and select the priorities for action. Records are kept of each meeting. They showed me the books. I couldn't, of course, read them, but I could see that they systematically kept a record. This exercise started in one village in the Shaidan Valley, and other villages were impressed and decided to emulate them. Point 12. Today, all 75 villages in the Shaidan Valley have formed their own local councils. Their next step was to form a valley shura, or council, and that meets monthly. And it is here that local disputes are resolved before they escalate into wider conflict. In the past 4 years, since the shura system has been in place, hundreds of local disputes have been resolved through discussion and compromise. The shura members, the people who have made up these little local councils, they say this business of resolving disputes is one of their key accomplishments. And they'll talk to you about how proud they are that this has been accomplished. Point 13. 1 year ago, the capital of Bamiyan province, Bamiyan town, elected its shura, and for the first time in the history of Afghanistan, a woman was elected to head the shura. 4 of the 10 members of that shura are women, and this is a breakthrough indeed. In addition, Bamiyan province is the only one of the 34 provinces in Afghanistan to have a woman governor. So it's a place where other people are now beginning to look from other provinces, look at it and say, what makes Bamiyan different? And I say, it's the women. To sum up, I think the international effort in Afghanistan is important to Canada. And not just militarily, although I support the work that our Canadian forces are doing in Kandahar. But even more, Afghanistan needs long-term development, such as Abdullah Berat and his team of Afghan volunteers are carrying out. While people often ask me about the difference between what local volunteers are doing and what our Canadian military are doing, and I'd say, well, you know, the military are there to do a certain aspect. They are there to contain the Taliban in their heartland. But they are there on a rotation basis. They can come for a period of 9 months or a year-long stretch as they are sent out there before rotating into another military group going. They cannot get down to doing long-term development. That's not their role. They can build schools, but they can't be there to see that that school is maintained or is kept going or not burned down by Taliban force. So it has to be long-term development of the kind that Abdullah Barat and others NGOs are carrying out. Point 15, the accomplishments that these people, the people in Bamiyan, are making, and their belief that what they are doing makes a difference, contributes greatly to the stability of that province. This is not to belittle the work that is being done along humanitarian lines by the military and other organizations, but what they're doing is not long-term development. To carry that out properly, Canadians have to gain a better understanding of the complexities of the Afghan people, including the diversity of their religions, ideologies, ethnicities. These are the things that make up their national psyche, and they are at the root of much of their internal discord. It is important to learn from Afghans themselves, and particularly to learn about their capabilities. One of the capabilities that comes to the fore most frequently is their spirit of resistance when things get really difficult. Since my return to Canada in June of this year, Abdullah's office house, that's our headquarters, has been ransacked and robbed, with the culprits making off with all the communications equipment in the building, the computers, the cell phones, the digital phones, etc., etc. Everything was taken. Abdullah was in a position of not being able to get in touch with anyone. He was off in his own remote village, and he had no way of communicating with anyone. His solution? To walk to the nearest village and use the computer of a friend in order to let me know what had happened. We've now raised the funds to get Abdullah a new computer and a cell phone, and he's back out in the villages getting more of their mud brick homes solar electrified against the onslaught of the winter cold. And you know, that cold and snow frequently cuts off access to the villages in the high mountain valleys. In Afghanistan, the hardy villagers have learned to take life one day at a time. What I have tried to describe to you today is how one person, recognizing the urgent need for leadership across the boundaries and borders of geography, ethnicity, and historical feuds in Afghanistan, is finding a means and compelling others to surmount those challenges. As I said at the outset, Afghanistan is still a country caught between two potential futures: a fragile democracy which moves forward, or a failed state. Afghanistan is finding a means and compelling others to meet those challenges. But given the current situation in Afghanistan, I have to say, however, that the jury on the future is still out. Thank you.